There is a specific kind of heartbreak that doesn't crack your chest open with a sudden, violent bang, but rather dissolves you slowly like acid eating through steel, until you look down at the space where your dignity used to be and realize that the people you love don't actually see you as a person, but as a prop, a wallet, or in my case, an aesthetic liability. And it was this realization that hit me on a humid Saturday afternoon in Newport, Rhode Island. Standing on the manicured lawn of a venue that cost more to rent for 8 hours than my first house cost to buy. My name is William, and I am a 68-year-old man who made his fortune in commercial concrete, a dirty, loud, unglamorous business that involves 4:00 a.m. wake-up calls, cracked skin, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that never really leaves you. But it was a business that allowed me to give my daughter, Sophia, a life of pure, unadulterated softness. A life where her hands never touched a shovel and her worries never extended beyond the thread count of her sheets or the lighting of her Instagram photos. I'm standing here now, wearing a tuxedo that cost $4,000, a tuxedo I was told to buy because my usual charcoal suit wasn't crisp enough for the vision, and I am watching the guests arrive, men in linen suits and women in pastel silk, feeling like an imposter in the very event I financed. The wedding of Sophia and Marcus was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the culmination of 28 years of fatherhood, the moment I walked my little girl down the aisle and handed her off to a man who would protect her. But instead, it has become a 3-day festival of narcissism orchestrated by a son-in-law who looks at me with the same disdain one might reserve for a stain on a rug. Marcus is 30, a brand architect, a job title I still don't fully understand despite having it explained to me a dozen times. And he comes from a world I don't belong to, a world of performative wealth where appearances are the only currency that matters. And from the moment he met me, he made it clear that while he loved my bank account, he found my presence to be an embarrassing necessity. I remember the engagement dinner, a lavish affair at a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan, where I reached for the check and Marcus didn't even say thank you. He just made a joke about how construction money spends just as well as old money. A comment that made his friends titter and made my jaw clench, but I let it slide because Sophia looked happy, and a father's job is to swallow his pride so his children don't have to choke on conflict. But the wedding planning, that was when the mask truly slipped. The budget started at a reasonable $50,000, a generous gift, I thought, but within weeks it had ballooned to $200,000, fueled by Marcus's insistence that the Newport mansion was the only venue that aligned with his personal brand. And every time I tried to pump the brakes, every time I suggested that perhaps we didn't need imported Italian marble chargers for the dinner plates, Sophia would tear up and Marcus would sigh that heavy, condescending sigh and say, "Bill, you have to understand this is an investment in our social capital. You can't put a price on the visual legacy of this day." Visual legacy. That was the phrase he used to justify bleeding me dry. If you have ever felt like your generosity was being weaponized against you, let me know in the comments, because I stood there writing check after check, telling myself it was for Sophia, telling myself that once the stress of the planning was over, we would be a family, but I was deluding myself. The exclusion was subtle at first. I was left off the email chains about the music. I wasn't invited to the food tasting because it might be too complex for your palate. Bill, we're doing fusion. And my suggestions for the guest list were vetoed because my friends, the men I had built my business with, the men who had actually helped me earn the money to pay for this circus, were deemed too rough around the edges for a black-tie garden party. "We want a cohesive look," Marcus had told me, scrolling through his phone without making eye contact. "No flannel, no work boots, no loud types." I swallowed that insult too, agreeing to only invite my lawyer and my brother, leaving behind 30 years of brotherhood because I wanted peace. But today, the day of the wedding, the simmering disrespect boiled over into open hostility. We were doing the first look photos, a modern tradition where the couple sees each other before the ceremony, and the photographer, a man named Pierre with a camera lens the size of a telescope and an attitude to match, was directing us around the gardens like cattle. The venue, the Breakers, was breathtaking, I'll admit, ocean views, Gilded Age architecture, manicured hedges, but the atmosphere was poisonous. I walked out onto the terrace, feeling stiff in my tuxedo, my hands that are scarred from decades of pouring concrete, hands that have a missing tip on the left ring finger from an accident in 1985, clasped nervously in front of me. Sophia looked beautiful, stunning really, in a dress that cost more than my first fleet of trucks, but she looked anxious, her eyes darting to Marcus for approval every few seconds. Marcus was preening, adjusting his cufflinks, checking his reflection in the window, looking every inch the model he pretended to be. "Okay, let's get the family shots," Pierre shouted. "Parents of the bride, come in. My wife passed away 10 years ago, a loss I still feel every morning when I wake up, so it was just me." I stepped forward, a swell of pride in my chest, ready to stand next to my daughter on her big day. I moved to stand on Sophia's right, smiling, imagining how this photo would look on my mantle. "Stop, stop," Marcus barked, holding up a hand. "Pierre, the lighting is off, it looks cluttered." Pierre lowered the camera. "It is the contrast, perhaps." Marcus walked over to me, not to fix my tie, not to pat my back, but to inspect me like I was a defective piece of furniture. "Bill," he said, his voice low but audible to everyone, including the bridesmaids who were watching from the sidelines. "It's the hands and the posture. You're standing like you're ready to lift a sandbag. It's ruining the line of the tuxedo, and frankly, the finger, it's drawing the eye." He gestured vaguely to my missing fingertip, the badge of honor I earned building the foundation of his lifestyle. Can you, I don't know, put your hands in your pockets or hide them behind Sophia? I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. Marcus, these are my hands. They're the hands that wrote the check for this venue. Sophia looked down at her bouquet, biting her lip. Dad, just maybe put them behind your back, please. Marcus just wants it to be perfect. I took a breath, fighting the urge to walk away right then. Fine, I said, putting my hands behind my back like a prisoner. Is that better? Marcus frowned, tilting his head. It's still not working. You look stiff, Pierre. What do you think? Pierre shrugged. The aesthetic is very vogue, very ethereal. He is very solid. It clashes a bit with the softness of the bride. Marcus sighed, that same damnable sigh. Okay, look, Bill, why don't you step out of this set? We'll do some with just me, Sophia, and my parents. We can do a candid shot of you later, maybe at the reception when the lights are lower. You don't fit the aesthetic we're going for right now. You're too industrial. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Industrial, that's a good word. We need Regency, and you're giving Rust Belt. Just grab a drink, relax. We'll call you when we need you. Step out. He was kicking me out of the family photos, the photos that are supposed to document the lineage, the love, the connection. He was erasing me from the visual history of the wedding because I looked like a man who worked for a living. I looked at Sophia, waiting, praying for her to intervene, to say, no, that's my father, he stays. I waited for the girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl whose tuition I paid, whose tears I dried, to stand up for the man who loved her more than life itself. But she didn't. She looked at Marcus, saw his annoyance, and then looked at me with pleading, watery eyes. Dad, it's just for the magazine submission, she whispered. We want to submit the photos to Weddings Daily and they have strict guidelines. Just go get a scotch, please, for me, for her. It was always for her. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet final click of a lock turning. I looked at Marcus, who was already fixing his hair, dismissing me entirely. I looked at Sophia, who was more concerned with a magazine submission than her father's dignity. And I realized that I wasn't a father to them. I was a financier. I was the silent partner who was expected to provide the capital and then disappear into the background so as not to ruin the brand image. I see, I said, my voice steady though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I don't fit the aesthetic, too industrial. Exactly, Marcus said, not even looking at me. Thanks for understanding, Bill. Pierre, let's reset. I turned around and walked away. I didn't go to the bar. I didn't go to get a scotch. I walked past the waiters holding trays of champagne I paid for. I walked past the string quartet playing music I paid for. I walked straight into the main building of the mansion, down the marble hallway to the administrative office where I knew the venue manager, a frantic little man named Stefan, was currently hiding from the stress of the day. I opened the door without knocking. Stefan jumped, dropping a stack of seating charts. Mr. William, is everything okay? The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. Can I get you anything? I closed the door behind me and locked it. Sit down, Stefan, I said, my voice calm, the voice of a man who has negotiated contracts worth millions, a voice that brooks no argument. Stefan sat, looking terrified. Is there a problem with the catering, the flowers? The problem, I said, pulling a chair closer to his desk, is the contract. I need you to pull it up on your screen now, Stefan typed frantically. Here it is. The Breakers wedding package, platinum tier, signed by you, Mr. William Miller. Correct, I said, and I am the sole signatory, am I not? Yes, sir, you are the client of record. And tell me, Stefan, what is the status of the final payment? Stefan looked at the screen. Well, the deposit and the second installment are paid. The final balance, $75,000, is scheduled to be run on the card on file today. Actually, I was just about to process it. We usually run it an hour before the ceremony to cover any last-minute additions. $75,000, that was just the venue fee balance. The catering was another 40. The florals were separate, but the venue held the keys. Don't run it, I said. Stefan blinked. Excuse me, do not run the card, I repeated. In fact, I want you to cancel the authorization, and I want you to terminate the event. Stefan's face went pale, draining of color so fast he looked like a ghost. Mr. William, I don't think I understand. The guests are here. The bride is taking photos. The ceremony is in 40 minutes. We can't cancel. Read the contract, Stefan. Clause 4, Section B. I read it very carefully before I signed it. The client reserves the right to cancel the event at any time prior to the commencement of the ceremonial vows, subject to the forfeiture of all deposits. I'm willing to forfeit the deposit. I'm willing to lose the $50,000 I've already paid, but I am not willing to pay another dime. And since I am the client and I am instructing you to cancel, if you proceed with the event, you are operating without a valid contract and without a guarantee of payment. If you run that card, I will report it as fraud. I will sue this venue for unauthorized charges and I will win because I am sitting here telling you verbally and in person that the deal is off. Stefan stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. But the bride, your daughter, my daughter, I said, feeling a coldness in my chest that scared me, has decided that I don't fit the aesthetic of this wedding. She and her fiancé have made it clear that my presence is a blemish on their visual legacy. So I am removing the blemish, and since the blemish is also the bank, I am removing the funding. I leaned forward. This isn't a negotiation, Stefan. You have two choices. Choice A, you shut it down, you tell your staff to pack up, you turn off the lights. You tell the guests the event is canceled due to a contractual dispute. I leave, you keep the deposit, we call it a day. Choice B, you ignore me, you let them get married. And then you try to chase me for the $75,000. I will tie you up in court for 5 years. I have lawyers who eat contracts like this for breakfast. I will claim breach of service. I will claim you allowed unauthorized parties to direct the event. I will make your life a living hell and you will never see that money. Stefan looked at me, he looked at the computer screen, he looked at the clock, he was a businessman too, he knew that a lawsuit from a concrete magnate was a losing battle, he swallowed hard. If I cancel, they will riot, the groom, he will be furious. Let him be furious, I said, standing up and buttoning my tuxedo jacket. He's a brand architect. I'm sure he can spin this, maybe he can live stream the disaster. Stefan picked up his walkie-talkie, his hand shaking. Attention all staff, this is Stefan, code red, I repeat, code red, cease all operations immediately, stop the music, close the bar, do not, I repeat, do not seat the guests for the ceremony. I heard the crackle of confusion on the other end. Stefan, say again, code red. The client has canceled the contract, Stefan said into the mic, his voice trembling. Shut it down now, I nodded at him. Thank you, Stefan, you're a smart man. I unlocked the door and walked out. I walked back down the marble hallway out onto the terrace. The chaos was just beginning to ripple through the crowd. The music stopped abruptly in the middle of a Vivaldi concerto. The bartenders were putting corks back into champagne bottles. The guests were looking around, confused, murmuring. What's going on? Is it a power outage? And then I saw them. Marcus and Sophia were standing near the archway where they were supposed to be married in 30 minutes. Pierre was lowering his camera. A staff member, the head of catering, was whispering something to Marcus. I watched the color drain from Marcus's face. I watched him gesticulate wildly. I watched Sophia put her hand to her mouth. They turned and looked toward the house. They saw me. I was standing at the top of the stairs looking down at them. Marcus stormed up the stairs, taking them two at a time, his face twisted in a mask of rage that was decidedly unaesthetic. Bill, he screamed, forgetting his cool, brand-conscious persona. What the hell is going on? The caterer says they've been ordered to stop. Stefan says the event is cancelled. Is this some kind of sick joke? I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw him for what he was, a small, hollow man in a rented suit. It's no joke, Marcus, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the sudden silence of the crowd. I was just reflecting on what you said about me being too industrial, about me not fitting the vision. Are you insane? Marcus hissed, grabbing my arm. You can't cancel a wedding. People are here. The press is here. Fix this. Go tell them to turn it back on. I can't, I said, pulling my arm away. I'm just the wallet, remember, and the wallet is closed. I decided that if I'm not good enough to be in the photos, I'm not good enough to pay the bill. Sophia ran up the stairs, her dress rustling, tears already streaming down her face, real tears this time, not the pretty ones she saved for the camera. Dad, please, you can't do this. It's my wedding. You're humiliating us. I'm humiliating you, I asked, looking at her with a sadness that felt infinite. Sophia, 10 minutes ago you stood there and watched this man tell me I was too ugly to stand next to you. You watched him erase me and you said nothing. You chose a magazine submission over your own father. I didn't mean it, she sobbed, reaching for my hand. It was just the stress. Dad, please, everyone is watching. Let them watch, I said. This is the reality, Sophia. This is the behind-the-scenes content. You wanted a perfect aesthetic. Well, the aesthetic of this family is that we pay our own way, and since Marcus is the architect, surely he can build a solution. I turned to the crowd, to the 150 guests staring up at us with open mouths. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice booming. I apologize for the inconvenience, but there will be no wedding today. The groom has informed me that my money is welcome, but my face is not, so I am taking both and leaving. I suggest you ask Marcus for a refund on your travel expenses. He's a brand architect. I'm sure he's good for it. A gasp went through the crowd. I saw Marcus's parents, haughty people who had barely spoken 2 words to me, looking like they wanted to faint. Marcus was shaking, his fists clenched. You old bastard, he spat. I will sue you. I will ruin you. You can try, I said, checking my watch, but you'd better hurry. The security guards are coming to escort everyone off the property in 15 minutes. Stefan is very efficient. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past them down the stairs through the parting crowd of stunned guests. I could hear Sophia screaming my name. I could hear Marcus cursing. I could hear the sound of a perfect, curated, expensive dream shattering into a million sharp pieces. I walked to the valet stand, handed the boy my ticket, and waited for my truck, my Ford F-150, the one Marcus hated because it was too country. When it arrived, I climbed in, threw my tuxedo jacket on the passenger seat, and drove out of the gates of the breakers. I didn't look back. I drove straight to a small dive bar on the wharf, a place with sawdust on the floor and fishermen at the bar, a place that definitely didn't fit the aesthetic. I ordered a beer and a shot of whiskey. My phone was blowing up in my pocket, calls from Sophia, texts from Marcus, angry voicemails from family members. I turned it off. I sat there in the dim light, looking at my hands, my scarred, rough, missing fingertip hands. They looked just fine to me. The whiskey in the dive bar tasted like kerosene and regret, a sharp, burning reminder that while I had won the battle at the venue, the war had only just begun. And as I sat there on the cracked vinyl stool, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of afternoon sunlight that pierced the gloom of the bar, I felt a vibration in my pocket that wasn't just a phone buzzing, but felt more like the tremors of an approaching earthquake. I had turned the phone off, or so I thought, but in my adrenaline-fueled exit, I must have only silenced it, or perhaps it was a phantom vibration, the kind you feel when your entire nervous system is wired for catastrophe. But when I finally pulled the device out and looked at the screen, the sheer volume of notifications was enough to make my stomach turn over. 64 missed calls, 112 text messages, voicemails filling up the inbox faster than I could delete them. And the names flashing on the screen weren't just Marcus and Sophia. They were my sister in Florida, my cousins in Ohio, even a business partner I hadn't spoken to in weeks, all drawn into the gravitational pull of the black hole I had created at the breakers. If you have ever been the subject of a family smear campaign, the kind where the narrative is spun so fast and so viciously that you don't even recognize yourself in the stories being told, tell me in the comments. Because as I unlocked the phone and began to scroll, I realized that Marcus wasn't just a brand architect. He was a master of propaganda, and he had wasted 0 minutes in painting me as a senile, abusive monster who had snapped and destroyed his daughter's happiness for no reason. The first text I opened was from Sophia, sent 10 minutes after I drove away. I can't believe you did this. You are dead to me. Do not come home. Do not try to contact us. You have ruined my life. Simple, direct, devastating, but the texts from Marcus were different. They were calculated, legalistic, threatening. You have committed a breach of contract and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are documenting everything. My lawyers will be in touch. Enjoy your money, you lonely old man. I put the phone face down on the sticky bar top, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like hypothermia. The bartender, a guy named Sal who looked like he had seen every variety of human misery, slid another shot toward me without asking. Rough day, he grunted, wiping a glass with a rag that was gray with age. You could say that, I replied, my voice raspy. I just canceled my daughter's wedding. Sal didn't blink. Cheaper than a divorce, he said and walked away. I let out a dry, humorless laugh because he was right, but the cost wasn't just financial, it was existential. I sat there for another hour, letting the alcohol blunt the sharp edges of the afternoon, but I knew I couldn't hide in a dive bar forever, and I knew I couldn't go back to the hotel where the guests were staying, so I booked a room at a generic chain motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where truckers sleep and nobody asks questions, because I needed to be invisible while I figured out my next move. I drove there in a daze, the tuxedo jacket lying on the passenger seat like a shed skin, and checked in under my middle name, Arthur, just to be safe. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner, a far cry from the ocean view suite I had paid for at the resort, but it felt like a bunker, and that's what I needed. I stripped off the expensive shirt, the studs, the cufflinks, and threw them into the corner, putting on the spare change of clothes I kept in my truck, jeans and a flannel shirt, and for the first time in hours I felt like myself again. But the peace was short-lived. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence, and then I made the mistake of opening the social media app on my phone, compelled by a morbid curiosity to see the damage. It was worse than I imagined. Marcus had gone live on Instagram. The video had been posted an hour ago and it already had 50,000 views. I clicked play, my heart hammering. The video showed Marcus and Sophia sitting in what looked like a hotel room, Sophia sobbing into a handkerchief, her makeup running, looking utterly broken, while Marcus stared into the camera with a somber, brave expression, the perfect picture of a protective husband. Hey guys, Marcus said, his voice dropping to that serious influencer whisper. I know you're all wondering why the wedding content stopped. I know we promised you a live stream of the vows. We are devastated to announce that the ceremony was canceled due to a severe mental health crisis involving Sophia's father. I gasped aloud in the empty motel room, a mental health crisis. He was framing it as a breakdown. Bill has been struggling for a while, Marcus continued, lying with a fluidity that was terrifying. We tried to accommodate him, we tried to include him, but today he had a violent outburst at the venue. He became aggressive with the staff, he attacked me verbally, and in a state of confusion, he canceled the checks and stormed off. It was terrifying. We are unsafe. We are currently in a secure location. We just ask for prayers for Sophia and honestly prayers for Bill because he clearly needs professional help that we can't provide. We are heartbroken, but we will not let this destroy our love. The comments section was a river of vitriol aimed squarely at me. OMG, that poor girl, cut him off. Dementia is so scary. He sounds dangerous. Sue him. I threw the phone across the bed. They weren't just angry, they were building a case. They were setting the stage to declare me incompetent. If they could convince the world, and more importantly, a judge, that I was mentally unstable, that my decision to cancel the wedding was the result of a cognitive decline, they could try to take control of my assets via conservatorship. It was the Britney Spears playbook applied to a concrete contractor. I paced the small room, the walls feeling like they were closing in. I needed to talk to someone rational. I called my lawyer David, a man I had known for 30 years, a shark in a pinstripe suit who had helped me navigate union disputes and hostile takeovers. It was Saturday night, but David answered on the first ring. William, he said, his voice tight. I was about to call you. I saw the video my daughter showed me. What the hell happened? It's a lie, David, I said, pacing. All of it. I didn't have a breakdown. He kicked me out of the photos because I have a missing finger. He told me I didn't fit the aesthetic, so I pulled the plug. It was a business decision. I stopped payment on a service I wasn't being allowed to participate in. David let out a long breath. Okay, that I believe. That sounds like you, but William, you need to understand the optics. Canceling a wedding 40 minutes before the start, screaming at the guests, driving off to an outsider, that looks like a manic episode, and Marcus is capitalizing on it. I just got an email from a lawyer representing them, a guy named Sterling. Do you know him? Never heard of him, I said. He's a high-profile litigator in Boston, specializes in family torts. The email is a preservation of evidence letter. They are claiming you caused Sophia severe psychological trauma and pecuniary loss. They are hinting at a lawsuit for millions, William, but that's not the scary part. What's the scary part? I asked, stopping by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked parking lot. The scary part, David said, is that they are asking for your medical records. They are asking for a list of your medications. They are building a capacity case. If they file for an emergency guardianship, they could freeze your accounts by Monday morning. They could argue that you are spending recklessly, the wedding cancellation fees alone are a fortune, and that you are a danger to your own estate. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the motel's air conditioning. They can't do that. I run a company. I manage 300 employees. I'm sane. I know that, David said, but the courts are on the side of caution. If Sophia, your only child, swears an affidavit that you've been acting erratic, forgetting things, becoming aggressive, a judge might sign a temporary order just to be safe, and once they have a foot in the door, it's hell to get them out. You need to get ahead of this. You need an independent psych evaluation immediately tomorrow morning. On a Sunday, I have a guy, David said, Dr. Aris. He does forensic psych for criminal cases. I'll call him. Meet him at his office in Providence at 8:00 a.m. We need a paper trail proving you are composed mentees. And William, do not talk to them, do not text them, do not answer the door. I won't, I said. I'm in a motel. They don't know where I am. But as I hung up the phone, a heavy pounding shook the door of my room. Bam, bam, bam. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I hadn't used my credit card. I had checked in as Arthur. Bill opened the door. It was Marcus. His voice was muffled by the cheap wood, but it was unmistakable. He wasn't screaming. He was shouting with authority. We know you're in there. Open up before we call the police for a wellness check. How did they find me? I looked at my truck parked outside, the GPS. The factory-installed tracker I used for my fleet management. I had the app on my phone, but Sophia had the login. I had given it to her years ago when she borrowed the truck to move into her college dorm just so I could make sure she was safe. I had never changed the password. They had tracked me like a stolen package. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. If I didn't open it, they would call the cops. They would claim I was in there hurting myself. They would use the police report as evidence of my instability. If I did open it, I was walking into a trap. I took a deep breath, channeled 30 years of dealing with job site foremen, and threw the bolt. I opened the door. Marcus stood there, still in his tuxedo trousers and shirt, though the tie was gone. Sophia was behind him, wrapped in a blanket, looking pale and shivering, but it wasn't just them. There was a third person, a woman with a camera, filming. "Turn that off," I said, blocking the doorway. "We're documenting this for our safety," Marcus said, stepping forward, trying to push past me. "We're here to make sure you're okay. You ran off. You're hiding in a motel. This isn't normal behavior, Bill." "I'm hiding from you," I said, holding my ground. "Get out of here. You are trespassing." "We're worried about you, Daddy," Sophia whimpered, stepping out from behind Marcus. "Please, just let us come in. We need to talk. You ruined everything, but can fix it. We can still fix it." "Fix it how?" I asked, looking at her. "By uncanceling the wedding. It's over, Sophia." "By making it right," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "Bill, look at this situation. You have exposed yourself to massive liability. The venue is going to sue you. The vendors are going to sue you. We have guests who flew in from Europe. The damages are astronomical. If we go to court, you will be destroyed. Your reputation in the industry gone. Who wants to do business with a crazy man?" "So what's the offer?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You didn't drive here to give me legal advice." Marcus smirked. It was the same smirk he had worn when he kicked me out of the photos. "We have a solution, a way to spin this. We put out a joint statement. We say it was a misunderstanding caused by a medication reaction. You check into a facility, a nice one, a spa, really for 30 days, just to rest. In the meantime, you sign a limited power of attorney giving Sophia control over the wedding accounts to pay off the vendors and settle the refunds. You save face. We save face. And when you get out, we have a small, private ceremony. You pay for it, of course, and you pay for the honeymoon we missed. We're thinking the Maldives, 2 weeks." I stared at them. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to lock me up. They wanted to institutionalize me for a month so they could raid my accounts without my oversight. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Marcus stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Then we release the other videos, the ones of you screaming at the staff, the ones we edited to make you look particularly unhinged, and we file the guardianship petition on Monday. We'll say you're a danger to yourself. We'll take the company bill, we'll take the trucks, we'll take the house. And you'll end up in a state home, eating Jell-O and wondering why you didn't just pay for the Maldives." Pause for a moment, ask yourself, what would you do? Would you sign the paper to make the nightmare stop? Would you buy your way out of the humiliation, or would you burn it all down? I looked at Sophia, my daughter. "Is this what you want?" I asked her. "You want to put your father in a mental ward so you can go to the Maldives?" Sophia looked down at her shoes. "I just want to be happy, Dad. You made me so unhappy today. You owe me this. You owe me a happy ending." "I owe you nothing," I said, my voice quiet and hard. "I paid for your life, I paid for your education, I paid for your car, I paid for your apartment, and today I realized that I bought everything except your respect." I looked at Marcus. "Get off my property. If you release the videos, go ahead. If you sue me, go ahead. But if you try to come near my company, I will bury you. I know things about you, Marcus. I know about the consulting fees you charge to your clients. I know about the offshore accounts you bragged about at Christmas when you were drunk. You think I'm just a concrete guy? I have forensic accountants on retainer who can find a penny in a sewer. You declare war on me, I'll audit your entire life." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He thought I was broken. "You're bluffing," he sneered. "Try me," I said. "Now leave before I call the police and show them my video of you trespassing and harassing an old man." I pulled out my phone and started recording them. Marcus swatted at my hand but stopped. He knew that assaulting me would destroy his narrative. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Come on, Sophia." They turned and walked back to their car, a rented Range Rover that I was probably paying for indirectly. The woman with the camera followed them. I slammed the door, threw the bolt, and engaged the chain. I was shaking. Not from fear, but from the realization of how close I had come to losing everything. They were predators, my own family. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window watching my truck, waiting for them to come back. They didn't, but at 4:00 a.m. my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from my bank. Alert: attempted wire transfer of 50,000 from account ending in 4590. Status: pending authorization, account 4590. That was my personal checking account, the one Sophia had access to for emergencies since college. They weren't waiting for the power of attorney, they were trying to drain the cash before I could close the accounts. I logged into the banking app. The transfer was initiated at 3:55 a.m. The recipient, MJ Global Consulting, Marcus's shell company. They were stealing from me, plain and simple. I hit the cancel button, then I hit report fraud, then I changed the password. Then I locked the account, but as I scrolled through the transaction history, I saw something that made my blood freeze. It wasn't just the 50,000. Over the last 6 months, there were dozens of transfers, small ones, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, Venmo payments, PayPal transfers, all going to Sophia or Marcus or cash. I pulled up the calculator on my phone. I added it up. $145,000. They had been siphoning money from me for months. The wedding budget overruns, they weren't just overruns, they were embezzlement. They were padding the invoices, taking the cash and putting it in their pockets. That's why Marcus wanted me to step out of the photos. That's why he didn't want me talking to the vendors. He wasn't ashamed of my aesthetic. He was afraid I would ask the caterer why the bill was $40,000 when the menu only cost 20. He was laundering money through the wedding. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just a prop, I was a mark. They had been running a long con on me, my daughter, my little girl. She wasn't a victim of Marcus's ambition, she was his accomplice. I sat there in the dark motel room, the glow of the phone screen illuminating the tears running down my face. I cried for the daughter I had lost. I cried for the lonely old man they thought I was, and then the tears stopped and the concrete hardened. I wasn't going to just defend myself against a guardianship. I was going to prosecute. I picked up the phone and texted David. "Forget the psych evaluation, we're going to the FBI. I have proof of wire fraud, and David, I want to evict them, the apartment in the city, the one I bought for Sophia. Start the paperwork. I want them on the street by Tuesday." I lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. They wanted a war, they wanted to talk about legacy. I would give them a legacy. I would leave them with absolutely nothing. But as the sun began to rise, painting the sky a bruised purple, I got one final text. It wasn't from Marcus, it wasn't from Sophia, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Miller, this is Stefan from the Breakers. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I found something in the bridal suite after you left. Something you need to see. It's a journal. Sophia's journal. I think you should come get it before the police do." A journal. Stefan had found Sophia's diary. Why would he call me? Why not give it to her? Unless it contained something criminal or something that proved I was right. "I'm coming," I texted back. I grabbed my keys and walked out into the cool morning air. I was exhausted, I was heartbroken, but I was moving. I drove back toward the mansion, back toward the scene of the crime, unaware that what was in that journal would make the embezzlement look like petty theft. The betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about something far darker. And I was driving straight into the heart of it. The drive back to the Breakers in the pale gray light of early dawn felt less like a commute and more like a funeral procession for the man I used to be, the naive father who believed that love was a currency that could buy loyalty. And as my truck tires crunched over the gravel of the service entrance, because I refused to use the main gate ever again, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about a man named William rather than living inside his skin. Stefan was waiting for me by the loading dock, shivering slightly in the morning mist, holding a small leather-bound book as if it were a piece of radioactive material, and the look in his eyes told me that whatever was inside those pages was going to hurt more than the cancellation fees he was undoubtedly worrying about. I rolled down the window, the cold sea air hitting my face, and didn't say a word. I just held out my hand, my calloused palm open and waiting, and Stefan placed the book into it with a hesitant, trembling motion, whispering, "I found it under the mattress in the bridal suite, Mr. William. She must have hidden it when they were packing in a panic, and I opened it to see who it belonged to, I swear, but then I saw your name and I saw the dates, and I couldn't just give it back to them, not after what I saw yesterday." And I nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his decency in a world that seemed suddenly devoid of it. Then I put the truck in reverse and backed away, driving until I found a secluded overlook facing the Atlantic Ocean, a place where the waves crashed violently against the rocks, mirroring the storm that was brewing in my gut. I turned off the engine and sat there for a long time, the leather journal heavy in my lap, its cover embossed with the initials S.M., Sophia Miller, soon to be Sophia Sterling, or so she had hoped, and I realized that opening this book was a one-way door, that once I read the thoughts of my daughter, I could never unknow them, never go back to the comfortable illusion that she was just misguided or influenced by a bad husband, but was instead something else entirely. I opened the cover. The handwriting was familiar, the same looping cursive that used to write "I love you, Daddy" on Father's Day cards made of construction paper, but the words were foreign, cold, and calculating. I skipped the early entries about wedding dresses and flower arrangements and flipped to the pages dated 6 months ago, around the time Marcus had started taking over the logistics of my life. October 14th. The Arthur Project is moving too slowly. Dad is stubborn. He refused to sign the power of attorney again today. Marcus says we need to increase the pressure. We need to make him feel old. We need to make him doubt his memory. Today I went to his house while he was at work and moved his reading glasses to the fridge. I took his keys and put them in the trash can. When he came home and couldn't find them, he looked so confused. It was pathetic, but it's working. He asked me if he was losing his mind. I told him, yes, Dad, you're forgetting things a lot lately. He believed me. We just need a few more incidents like this and Dr. Evans will have to sign off on the competency review. I stopped reading, my breath catching in my throat, a physical pain stabbing at my chest, the lost keys, the misplaced glasses, the times I had sworn I left a document on my desk only to find it in the shredder. They weren't senior moments. They were gaslighting. Systematic, predatory gaslighting designed to make a healthy 68-year-old man believe he was developing dementia so they could seize control of his estate before he died. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to open the truck door and spit bile onto the pavement. My own daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike. She had come into my home, the sanctuary I built for us, and played tricks on my mind like a cruel child pulling legs off a spider. I wiped my mouth and forced myself to read on, needing to see the bottom of the pit. December 2nd, the transfers are going through unnoticed. Dad doesn't check the online banking, he still waits for the paper statements, so I just intercept the mail when I go over for Sunday dinner. Marcus is a genius. We've moved $80,000 to the shell company this month. It's barely a dent in his accounts, he has so much it's disgusting, he just sits on it like a dragon, he doesn't need it. We need it, Marcus needs it for the investors. If we don't pay off the bridge loan by the wedding, we're dead. Dad is the golden goose, we just have to slice him open a little bit at a time. Investors, bridge loan, the words jumped out at me. Marcus wasn't just a spendthrift, he was in debt, deep debt. He was running some kind of scheme and I was the bailout. I flipped to the final entry dated yesterday morning, the morning of the wedding. This is it, the big day, not the wedding, but the handover. Marcus has the papers ready. We're going to get him drunk at the reception, really drunk, and have him sign the vendor contracts, which are actually the irrevocable trust transfer documents. He trusts me. He'll sign anything if I cry a little and tell him I love him. By Monday, we'll own the company, and we can put him in that facility in Vermont Marcus found. It has a nice view. He likes views. Goodbye, Dad. Thanks for the money. I slammed the book shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cab of the truck. They weren't just stealing. They were planning a coup. They were going to trick me into signing away my life's work, my concrete empire, and then warehouse me in a nursing home while they spent my fortune. The betrayal was so absolute, so total, that it burned away the sadness and left only a cold, hard resolve, the kind of resolve that gets a skyscraper built in the middle of winter. I wasn't William the father anymore. I was William the CEO, and I had just discovered a hostile takeover attempt by 2 internal employees. I started the truck, the engine roaring to life, and I didn't drive back to the motel. I drove straight to my office, the headquarters of Miller Concrete, a low-slung brick building in the industrial park that I owned free and clear. It was Sunday morning, the lot was empty, but I had my keys, the keys they hadn't managed to steal yet, and I let myself in, the smell of dust and cement calming me instantly. I went to my safe, spun the dial, and pulled out my estate planning documents, my corporate bylaws, and the deed to the apartment in Boston that Sophia lived in. I called my forensic accountant, a man named Leo who had the personality of a calculator and the loyalty of a bulldog. I said when he answered, sounding groggy, I need you at the office now and bring your laptop, we're auditing the family. On a Sunday, Bill, it's an emergency, I said. I've been embezzled by Sophia and Leo. I think it's over 6 figures. Leo didn't ask another question. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I called David, my lawyer. David, I said, my voice steady. I have the journal. You were right. It's a capacity case, but they're the ones who manipulated it. I want to file a restraining order, not against them coming near me, I can handle that, but a financial restraining order. I want to freeze every asset Sophia has access to, the credit cards, the trust fund distributions, the apartment utilities, everything. Cut the cord today. David was silent for a moment. William, if we do that, we are declaring war. There's no going back. They tried to put me in a home, David, I said. They tried to make me think I was crazy. The war started 6 months ago. I just didn't know I was fighting it. File the papers. By noon, Leo had uncovered the trail. It was clumsy, arrogant, the work of people who thought they were smarter than they were. Marcus had set up a vendor called Lux Event Planning, and Sophia had been paying invoices to it from my personal account for consulting. The money then moved to a crypto exchange in the Bahamas. It was classic wire fraud. We have enough here to send them to prison, Leo said, looking over his glasses. Federal prison, this is interstate wire fraud. Do you want to call the FBI? I looked at the spreadsheet, the columns of numbers representing my hard work siphoned off by the people I loved. Not yet, I said. Prison is too easy. They need to feel what it's like to be powerless. They need to be evicted from the life they stole. I picked up the deed to the apartment. It was a penthouse in the Back Bay, a $3 million property I had bought for Sophia when she graduated, thinking I was giving her a head start. The deed was in my name. She was a tenant at will, a tenant who hadn't paid rent in 5 years. David, I said into the speakerphone. Draft an immediate eviction notice for the Marlborough Street property. Cause illegal activity on the premises, wire fraud, and unauthorized renovation. I know they knocked down a wall without asking. Serve it today. You want to evict them on their wedding weekend? David asked. They aren't on their honeymoon, I said. They're in a hotel room plotting my demise. They're probably heading back to the apartment right now to regroup. I want to meet them there. I hung up and grabbed my coat. I drove to Boston, a 2-hour drive that felt like 2 minutes, my mind replaying every interaction, every lost set of keys, every look of pity they had given me. I parked my truck right in front of the brownstone, blocking the hydrant because I didn't care about a ticket, and I walked up to the front door. The doorman, a guy named Patrick who I tipped heavily every Christmas, looked at me with surprise. "Mr. Miller, I didn't expect you. I thought, well, I heard about the wedding." "Plans changed, Patrick," I said. "Are they upstairs?" "Just got in about an hour ago," Patrick whispered. They looked upset. Mr. Marcus was yelling at the Uber driver. "Thanks, Patrick." I took the elevator to the top floor. I didn't knock. I used my master key. The door swung open and I walked into the foyer of the apartment I paid for, the apartment filled with furniture I bought. The place was a wreck. Suitcases were exploded open on the floor, wedding gifts that had been shipped early were torn open, and Marcus was pacing the living room screaming into his phone. Sophia was sitting on the white sofa, drinking wine directly from the bottle. They froze when they saw me. "You," Marcus shouted, dropping the phone, "you have some nerve coming here. Do you know I have lawyers drafting a lawsuit right now? You are going to pay for every cent of emotional damage you caused." "Get out," I said, 2 words, quiet, deadly. Marcus blinked. "Excuse me, this is my home." "This is my house," I corrected. "Check the deed, you are a guest who just stole $145,000 from the host." I threw the stack of printouts Leo had given me onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy thud. "I know about Lux event planning, I know about the crypto transfers, and I know about the Arthur project." Sophia dropped the wine bottle. It shattered on the floor, red wine staining the white rug like blood. You read my journal," she whispered, her face going white. "I read it," I said. "I read how you moved my keys. I read how you tampered with my reality. I read how you planned to lock me away. You are a monster, Sophia. You aren't my daughter. You're a con artist." "It wasn't like that," she screamed, standing up. "We were desperate. Marcus was in trouble. These guys, they were going to hurt him. We needed the money. So you decided to hurt me instead," I said. "You decided to sacrifice your father to save a thief." I turned to Marcus. "And you, the brand architect, you built a brand on my money. Well, the funding is pulled. I have filed a police report for the theft. I have filed a restraining order freezing your accounts, and I am currently standing in my property telling you that you are trespassing." "You can't kick us out," Marcus yelled, his bravado cracking to reveal the panic underneath. "We have rights. We have tenancy rights. It takes months to evict someone in Massachusetts." "For a normal tenant, yes," I said. "But for a tenant who has committed a felony on the property," I called the precinct on the told them I have squatters who have embezzled corporate funds and are destroying evidence. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. Marcus ran to the window. "You called the cops on your own family." "You aren't family," I said. "Family doesn't gaslight you. Family doesn't plan to put you in a nursing home so they can buy a beach house. You are criminals, and you are about to be treated like criminals." "Dad, please." Sophia threw herself at my feet, grabbing my legs. "Don't let them arrest us. Marcus has a record. If he gets arrested again, he goes away for a long time. Please, I'll do anything. I'll sign the trust back. Just stop the police." "A record?" Of course he had a record. "Let go of me," I said, stepping back. "You should have thought about his record before you tried to frame me for dementia." The elevator dinged. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall. The door, which I had left ajar, was pushed open by 2 Boston police officers. "Mr. Miller?" one asked. "That's me," I said. "These are the individuals. I have the proof of ownership and the proof of the theft right here." I pointed to the papers. "And I want them removed from my property immediately." "This is a civil matter," Marcus screamed, backing away. "He's lying. He's senile. I have a forensic audit that says otherwise," I said to the officer, "and a journal where they confess to elder abuse." The officer looked at Marcus, then at the shattered wine bottle, then at the frantic state of the room. "Sir, ma'am, you need to come with us. We can sort this out at the station, but the owner wants you out." "I'm not going." Marcus lunged for the papers on the table, trying to tear them up. The officer tackled him. It was ugly. It was violent. It was exactly the kind of scene Marcus would have called low class, but now he was the star of the show. They cuffed him. They cuffed Sophia when she tried to intervene. I stood there watching my daughter being led away in handcuffs, weeping, begging me to help her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't reach for my wallet. I didn't step in. I let her go. I watched the door close behind them. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I looked around at the luxury I had provided, the trap I had built for myself. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street. I saw them being loaded into the squad car. People were filming with their phones. It would be on the internet in an hour, the brand architect's final viral moment. But as I turned to leave to walk away from the wreckage of my family, I saw something on the desk in the corner, Marcus's laptop. It was open, and on the screen was a chat window, a secure messaging app. I walked over and looked at it. It was a conversation with a user named Vector. "Vector, did you get the signature? The deadline is Monday." "Marcus, the wedding was canceled." The old man flipped out. "I need more time." "Vector, you don't have time. You owe us $2.5 million. If we don't get the trust fund access by Monday, we aren't coming for the money. We're coming for the girl. The girl, Sophia. They weren't just in debt. They were in danger, real physical danger." Marcus had leveraged Sophia's safety against my fortune. He had put a target on her back. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking. I had just sent them to jail. Jail was safe. Jail was secure. They would be bilaid out eventually. And when they got out, Vector would be waiting. I realized then that the eviction wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much more dangerous game. I wasn't just fighting a greedy son-in-law anymore. I was fighting the people who owned him. I sat down in Marcus's chair, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I could close the laptop and walk away. I could let them face the consequences. But Sophia, despite everything, despite the journal, despite the betrayal, She was still the girl I taught to ride a bike. If I let the wolves take her, I was no better than Marcus. I took a deep breath. I needed to know who Vector was. I needed to know who I was really fighting. I started typing. This isn't Marcus, I wrote. This is William Miller, the man with the money. We need to talk. I hit send. Pause for a moment. Ask yourself, would you pay the ransom for the person who held the knife to your back? Would you save the daughter who plotted your demise? I watched the three dots appear on the screen as Vector typed back, Mr. Miller, we've been waiting for you to get involved. Let's talk about a settlement. I leaned back, the adrenaline surging through my veins, replacing the exhaustion. I was 68 years old, I was alone, my family was in jail, and I was about to negotiate with a loan shark. I cracked my knuckles, the sound loud in the empty penthouse. Okay, I whispered. Let's see who has the better foundation. The cursor on the screen blinked with a rhythmic, hypnotic indifference, a tiny digital pulse that represented the only lifeline between my daughter's safety and the abyss into which her husband had thrown her. And as I sat in the leather chair of the penthouse office, surrounded by the wreckage of a life bought with my money and destroyed by their greed, I typed the words that would shift the battlefield from the courtroom to the gutter. I am not Marcus, I typed, my fingers heavy and deliberate on the keys. I am the bank, and if you want to get paid, you will stop threatening the collateral and start negotiating with the owner. The response from Vector took 30 agonizing seconds to appear, 30 seconds in which I could hear the distant sirens of the police car carrying my daughter to a holding cell, a sound that tore at my heart even as my brain told me it was the safest place for her to be. Mr. Miller, the message finally read, the text glowing white against the dark background of the encrypted app. We prefer dealing with the owner. The architect has been unreliable. The debt is $2.5 million, principal and interest. We accept wire transfer or crypto. You have 24 hours before we assume the collateral is forfeited. Forfeited, a sterile corporate word for murder. I stared at the screen, realizing that Marcus hadn't just borrowed money. He had sold shares in my daughter's life, treating her existence as a futures contract that could be liquidated if the market turned against him. I didn't reply immediately because in negotiation, silence is the loudest noise you can make, and instead I picked up my phone and dialed David, my lawyer, who was probably halfway through a bottle of scotch by now. David, I said, my voice sounding like gravel grinding in a mixer. Change of plans, I need you to meet me at the precinct, I'm posting bail. There was a pause, a heavy silence on the line. William, are you insane? David asked, his voice rising. We just had them arrested, we just handed the police a mountain of evidence for wire fraud. If you bail them out now, you look like a capricious old man who can't make up his mind. You weaken the case, you weaken the eviction. I'm not bailing them out, I said, standing up and walking to the window, looking down at the city lights that seemed to blur through the mist. I'm bailing her out. Sophia, Marcus stays in. I want him to rot in that cell until I decide what to do with him. But Sophia, she's in danger, David, real danger. I can't leave her in the system where Vector can reach her. David sighed, the sound of a man who knows his client is walking into a minefield. You know she's going to hate you, right? You know she's going to scream and fight and probably try to bail Marcus out the second she's free. She can try, I said, but I'm going to revoke her access to every dime she has. If she wants to save him, she'll have to do it with a tin cup on the street corner. Meet me there in 20 minutes. I closed the laptop, taking it with me, evidence, leverage, and a communication device all in one, and took the elevator down to the parking garage, my truck feeling like a tank as I navigated the narrow streets of Boston toward the police station. The precinct was a grim, fluorescent-lit purgatory that smelled of stale coffee, floor cleaner, and human misery. And as I walked in, the desk sergeant looked up with a mixture of boredom and recognition, likely having seen the viral video of the wedding disaster on his news feed. I processed the paperwork with a mechanical detachment, writing a check for $50,000 for Sophia's bail, money that I would likely never see again, and requested that Marcus remain in custody, citing his flight risk and the likelihood of him tampering with witnesses. When the officer brought Sophia out, she looked like a ghost of the girl who had stood in a couture gown 6 hours ago. She was wearing a gray prison-issue sweatshirt, her makeup smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks, her hair a tangled mess, and her eyes were swollen shut from crying. She saw me standing there, leaning against the wall with my arms crossed, and her expression shifted instantly from misery to hot, blinding rage. You, she screamed, lunging at me before the officer held her back. You put me in a cage, you humiliated me. Where is Marcus? Where is my husband? Your husband is where he belongs, I said, my voice calm, refusing to rise to her bait. He's in a cell, Sophia, and he's going to stay there. I posted bail for you. You're coming with me. I'm not going anywhere with you, she spat, struggling against the officer's grip. I hate you. I will never forgive you for this. You're trying to control me. You're trying to ruin our lives because you're jealous of our love. Love. I laughed, a harsh, barking sound that startled the desk sergeant. You think that's love? Sophia, get in the truck. I have something to show you, something that will make that jail cell look like a spa. She fought, she screamed, she threatened to sue me, but eventually the reality of her situation. No wallet, no phone, no keys, and nowhere to go settled in. And she slumped into the passenger seat of my F-150, sulking like a teenager, staring out the window as I drove us away from the city, not toward her apartment, but toward my house, the fortress on the hill that she had tried to steal. The drive was silent, a thick, suffocating silence filled with the static electricity of her hatred, but I didn't try to bridge the gap. I didn't try to explain because words are useless against delusions. Only hard evidence can break a fever like hers. We arrived at my house and I unlocked the front door, the locks I had already changed earlier that day, and ushered her into the study, the room where I had signed the contracts that built my empire, and the room where she had stolen my keys to gaslight me. Sit down, I ordered, pointing to the leather chair opposite my desk. She remained standing, crossing her arms, shivering slightly. I want my phone, she demanded. I need to call a lawyer. I need to get Marcus out. You don't need a lawyer, I said, opening Marcus's laptop and placing it on the desk, turning the screen toward her. You need a reality check, read this. I pointed to the chat with Vector. She glanced at it, her lip curling in disdain, thinking it was just another business deal, another spreadsheet I was boring her with. But then she read the words, "We aren't coming for the money, we're coming for the girl." I watched her face. I watched the color drain out of it, leaving her skin gray and translucent. I watched her eyes widen, darting back and forth across the screen, reading the history, reading the threats, reading the dates that corresponded with the frantic transfers of cash. What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who is Vector?" "Vector is the loan shark your husband owes $2.5 million to," I said, leaning against the edge of the desk. "Vector is the reason Marcus needed the wedding money. Vector is the reason he wanted the trust fund, and Vector is the man Marcus offered you to." "No," she shook her head, backing away. "No, Marcus wouldn't. He loves me. This is fake. You made this up. You hacked his computer and wrote this to scare me." "Scroll up," I said. "Read the messages from last month. Read where Marcus sends them your schedule. Read where he tells them you go to yoga on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Read where he tells them the security code to your apartment." She scrolled. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely use the trackpad. She read the messages. She saw the photos Marcus had sent, photos of her sleeping, photos of her walking the dog, proof of life sent to a predator to buy time. She gasped, a sound like a drowning victim breaking the surface, and collapsed into the chair, covering her mouth with her hand. He sent them pictures of me. He used you as collateral, Sophia," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, the anger replaced by a terrible pity. "He didn't marry you for your aesthetic. He didn't marry you for your personality. He married you because you were a human shield. He knew that if he couldn't pay, he could offer you up, or he could use the threat against you to force me to pay. You weren't his wife. You were his insurance policy." She started to cry, but these weren't the angry, entitled tears of the wedding. These were the deep, racking sobs of a woman whose entire reality has just shattered into dust. "Why?" she wailed. "Why would he do this? He said we were partners. He said we were building an empire. He was building a pyramid scheme," I said, "and you were the bottom brick." I let her cry. I poured her a glass of water and let her sit there for 10 minutes, processing the horror of it, letting the truth burn away the lies she had told herself for years. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and raw, but the hatred was gone, replaced by fear. "What do we do?" she whispered. They said 24 hours. That was 6 hours ago. They're coming for me." "They aren't coming for you," I said, "because they think I'm the new owner of the debt and I'm going to settle it." "You're going to pay them?" she asked, hope flickering in her eyes. $2 million, Dad, that's so much money." "I'm not paying them a dime," I said, standing up and closing the laptop. "I don't pay blackmailers and I don't pay for mistakes I didn't make. I'm going to meet them." "Meet them?" she shrieked. "Are you crazy? They'll kill you. You're 68 years old. You're a concrete contractor, not John Wick." "Exactly," I said. "I'm a concrete contractor, which means I know how to build things that last and I know how to bury things that don't. Stay here. Don't answer the door. Don't turn on the lights. I have a meeting to prepare for." I left her in the study, locking the door from the outside for her safety and my peace of mind, and went to the garage. I didn't grab a gun. I didn't own a gun. Grabbed my blueprints, specifically the blueprints for the new luxury high-rise Vector's shell company was laundering money through. How did I know? Because Leo, my forensic accountant, had been busy while I was at the police station. He had traced the IP address of the Vector messages. It routed back to a server owned by Vanguard Development, a shady real estate firm that had just broken ground on a 50-story tower in the Seaport District. And who was the concrete supplier for that? Miller Concrete. Me? I smiled a cold, hard smile. They were threatening me while standing on my foundation. I drove to the construction site. It was 3:00 a.m. The site was deserted, a skeleton of steel and rebar rising into the fog. I walked into the site trailer, used my master code, and pulled up the pour schedule. The main foundation pour, the mat slab, was scheduled for tomorrow morning. 4,000 cubic yards of concrete, a $2 million operation. If that pour didn't happen, or if the mix was wrong, the tower would be delayed for months, costing them tens of millions in financing penalties. I pulled out my phone and texted Vector back. "Meet me at the Vanguard site, top of the structure, 4:00 a.m. Come alone or the foundation cracks before it even dries." It was a bluff mostly, but a bluff backed by the fact that I controlled the trucks. I waited on the unfinished 10th floor, the wind whipping through the open steel beams, looking out over the city that I helped build. 10 minutes later, a black SUV rolled onto the site. Two men got out. One was tall, wearing a trench coat. The other was muscle. They took the construction elevator up. I stood near the edge, leaning against a pallet of rebar. They walked toward me, their footsteps echoing on the metal decking. "Mr. Miller," the tall man said. He looked corporate, bored, like a man dealing with a pest. "You have a flair for the dramatic, dragging us out to a construction site in the middle of the night. It's a bit cliché." "It's my office," I said, "and you're trespassing." "We're partners," the man smiled, a shark-like grin. "Vanguard is one of our holdings. We know you supply the concrete. We know you're reliable. That's why we were surprised when your son-in-law turned out to be such a disappointment. We expected better vetting from a man of your stature." Marcus isn't family, I said. He's a mistake I'm correcting, but let's talk about the debt. You want 2.5 million. We want our money, the man said, stepping closer, and if we don't get it, we take the girl. It's a simple equation. Balance the ledger. Here's my counteroffer, I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It wasn't a check, it was a chemical analysis report. This is the test result for the test batch of concrete my trucks are scheduled to pour into your foundation at 7:00 a.m. Do you know what happens if you add too much sugar to a concrete mix? The man frowned. Sugar, sugar, I repeated. It destroys the chemical bond. The concrete never sets. It stays liquid forever, a slushy gray mess. If my trucks pour that mix tomorrow, you won't have a foundation. You'll have a swimming pool. And you'll have to dig it all out, scrub the rebar, and start over. The delay will trigger the penalty clauses in your financing. You'll lose $20 million by next week, and the city inspectors, I'll make sure they know exactly why the pour failed. I'll trigger an investigation into the funding sources of Vanguard Development. I imagine the IRS would be very interested in your crypto holdings. The man stared at me. The bored expression vanished, replaced by a cold calculation. You're threatening to sabotage your own job. You'll be sued. You'll lose your license. I'm 68, I said. I'm retiring anyway. I don't care about the license. I care about my daughter. So here is the deal. You wipe the debt. You erase Marcus's ledger. You forget Sophia exists. And in exchange, the pour goes ahead as scheduled. The tower goes up. You make your money on the back end. But if you touch a hair on her head, I sweeten the mix. And I bring this whole building down around your ears. The wind howled through the girders. The muscles stepped forward, reaching for his jacket, but the tall man held up a hand. He looked at me with a newfound respect. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw that I was willing to burn my own legacy to save my child. You play a hard game, old man, he said softly. I play for keeps, I replied. Do we have a deal? The man paused, looking at the city lights, calculating the risk. 2 million versus 20 million. It was simple math. Debt is cleared, he said, but Marcus is yours. We don't want him. He's a liability. I'll handle Marcus, I said. And Sophia, she's off the board, the man said. We never saw her. Good, I said. Now get off my sight. I have work to do. They turned and left, disappearing back down the elevator. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the city, feeling the adrenaline crash. I had done it. I had stared down the devil and won, but the victory felt hollow. I had saved Sophia from the mob, but I couldn't save her from the truth. I drove back to the house as the sun came up, exhausted to my bones. I unlocked the study. Sophia was asleep in the chair, curled up like a child. She woke up when I entered, her eyes wide with fear. Did you pay them? She asked. It's handled, I said. They won't bother you again. She let out a sob of relief and ran to hug me. I stood stiffly, letting her embrace me, but I didn't hug her back. I couldn't. The bridge was burned. Thank you, Daddy, she cried. I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to you. I promise. We can start over. We can't start over, I said, pulling away. Sophia, I bailed you out. I cleared the debt, but I meant what I said. You aren't my daughter anymore. You're a tenant I'm evicting. What? She stepped back, shocked, but you saved me. I saved a human being, I said, but I can't save our relationship. You gaslighted me. You stole from me. You betrayed me. That doesn't go away just because the bad men are gone. But where will I go? She asked, panic rising. Marcus is in jail. I have no money. You have a degree, I said. You have your health and you have a second chance. Use it. I suggest you go to your mother's sister in Ohio. She always liked you, but you can't stay here and you can't go back to the penthouse. The locks are changed there too. You're kicking me out now. I'll give you a check for $5,000, I said, walking to the desk and writing it out. That's for a bus ticket and a first month's rent somewhere cheap. Consider it the final installment of the Arthur project. I handed her the check. She looked at it, then at me, seeing the finality in my eyes. She took it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. She walked out of the study, out of the house, and out of my life. I watched her go through the window, feeling a terrible ache in my chest, but also a sense of lightness. The parasites were gone, the foundation was cleared, I was alone but I was standing, but the story wasn't quite over. 2 days later I was at the office reviewing the concrete pour reports when my phone rang. It was the jail. Mr. Miller, the officer said, we have a situation. Marcus, he made bail. What? I stood up. Who bailed him out? I froze their accounts. Law firm posted it, the officer said. Anonymous client, but that's not the problem. He's been released, and he told the processing officer that he was going to finish the job. We thought you should know. I dropped the phone. Finish the job. Marcus wasn't running. He was coming for me. He had nothing left to lose. His wife was gone. His money was gone. His reputation was destroyed. He was a cornered rat, and cornered rats bite. I looked out the window of my office. My truck was parked out front. There was another car in the lot, a rented sedan, engine running. I saw the driver's door open. Marcus stepped out. He looked deranged. Unshaven, wearing the same clothes he was arrested in, holding a tire iron. He walked toward the front door of the concrete plant. He wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to kill. I looked around the office. I was alone. The staff had gone home for the day. It was just me and him. I didn't call the police. There wasn't time. I looked at the security monitor. He was smashing the glass of the front door. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a heavy brass paperweight shaped like a cement mixer, an award from the Chamber of Commerce. I walked out into the hallway to meet him. Come on, Marcus, I whispered. Let's see if you fit the aesthetic of a hospital room. The sound of safety glass shattering is distinct. A sharp, violent crump followed by the cascading tinkle of 1,000 diamonds hitting the linoleum floor. And as Marcus stepped through the ruined frame of my office entrance, the tire iron in his hand catching the fluorescent emergency lights like a jagged bolt of lightning, I realized that this was the inevitable conclusion to a tragedy that had begun the moment I signed the first check for a wedding that was never about love but about larceny. My name is William, and I have spent 40 years in the construction industry facing down union bosses, corrupt inspectors, and the brutal indifference of New Zealand winters on job sites. But I had never looked into the eyes of a man who wanted to kill me until I looked at the boy I had welcomed into my home. The boy who was now panting with a feral, drug-fueled rage, his eyes wide and bloodshot, stripped of all the pretension and aesthetic curation that had defined his existence. He didn't look like a brand architect anymore. He looked like a desperate junkie whose fix was my destruction. "It's all your fault," he screamed, his voice cracking, stepping over the threshold, the glass crunching under his loafers, expensive loafers that I had probably paid for. "You ruined it. You couldn't just die. You couldn't just sign the papers and die. We had a plan. We had a life." He swung the tire iron, smashing a framed photo of Sophia and me on the wall, the glass exploding outward. I stood behind my heavy oak desk, the brass cement mixer award heavy in my hand, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was strangely cold, calculating the distance between us, the weight of his weapon versus mine, and the sad, pathetic reality that my daughter had married a man who was weak enough to steal but violent enough to kill when caught. "It's over, Marcus," I said, my voice low and steady, projecting the authority of a foreman on a chaotic site. "The police are coming. You're just adding years to your sentence. Put it down." "There is no sentence," he shrieked, lunging forward. "If you're gone, the trust reverts to Sophia. She's the next of kin. I just need you gone." He vaulted over the desk, a surprisingly athletic move born of pure adrenaline, and swung the iron at my head. I ducked, feeling the wind of the metal bar whistle past my ear, and slammed the brass paperweight into his ribs. I felt the impact, the crunch of bone, and heard the air leave his lungs in a wheezing gasp. But he didn't stop. He tackled me, driving me back into the credenza, the breath knocked out of me as my 68-year-old spine hit the wood. We grappled on the floor, a messy, undignified struggle of limbs and grunts. He was younger, stronger, but he was fighting with panic. I was fighting with the accumulated rage of a man who had been erased, humiliated, and betrayed. He clawed at my face, his fingernails digging into my skin, screaming obscenities, trying to bring the tire iron down on my skull, but I caught his wrist, my grip strength, honed by decades of hauling rebar, clamping down like a vice. "You are nothing," he spat, spittle hitting my cheek. "You are just a checkbook." "The account is closed," I gritted out, and with a surge of effort that I knew I would pay for later, I twisted his wrist, forcing the iron from his hand, and rolled him over, pinning him to the carpet with my forearm against his throat. He thrashed, bucking like a wild animal, but I leaned my weight into him, staring down into his terrified eyes. "You wanted a legacy, Marcus," I whispered, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "This is it, you attacking an old man on the floor of a concrete plant. This is your brand." The sirens wailing outside weren't the distant ones from my imagination. They were real blue lights flashing against the office blinds, cutting through the gloom. The officer who had called me from the jail had evidently sent a patrol car immediately after hanging up, suspecting exactly this outcome. "Police, open up!" Heavy boots pounded down the hallway. "In here," I shouted, not letting up the pressure on Marcus's throat. Two officers burst in, guns drawn, taking in the scene, the shattered glass, the overturned furniture, the elderly man pinning the younger one. "Get off him, hands in the air." I released Marcus and rolled away, sitting up against the desk, clutching my side where I was sure a rib was cracked. Marcus scrambled back, trying to run, but he ran straight into the barrel of a Glock. They cuffed him face down on the glass-covered floor, reading him his rights, but he wasn't listening. He was sobbing, a high, keening sound of total defeat. As they dragged him out, he looked back at me, his face streaked with tears and blood. "She knew," he screamed, a final, desperate attempt to hurt me. "Sophia knew I was coming. She told me you were here. She wanted this." I watched him disappear into the hallway, the words hanging in the air like toxic smoke. I didn't know if he was lying to spite me or telling the truth, and the tragedy was that it didn't matter anymore. The trust was so thoroughly shattered that even the possibility was enough to sever the last thread. The paramedics arrived moments later, fussing over my cuts and the bruising on my face, urging me to go to the hospital, but I refused. I sat in my office chair amidst the ruin of my workspace and watched the sun come up over the industrial park. I was battered, I was bleeding, and I was alone, but I was alive. And for the first time in months, the silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. The next 6 months were a grueling marathon of legal proceedings, a slow-motion car crash that I had to watch from the witness stand. Marcus was charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, grand larceny, and wire fraud. The anonymous law firm that had bailout him out turned out to be a retainer his parents had set up years ago, a safety net he had burned through in less than 24 hours. His parents, wealthy socialites from Connecticut, didn't come to the trial. They sent a lawyer to distance themselves from the unfortunate events, effectively disowning him in the most polite, legalistic way possible. The trial was a spectacle, covered by the same local news stations that had aired his smear campaign against me, but this time the narrative was different. The forensic evidence Leo had compiled was damning. The jury saw the transfers, they saw the Arthur Project journal entries, they saw the text messages to the lone shark, and they saw the video I had taken of them trespassing at the motel. It took the jury less than 3 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Marcus stood as the sentence was read, 15 years in federal prison, no parole. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, a broken man who had gambled his life on the idea that I was weak and lost everything because he underestimated the strength of a man who builds foundations for a living. But the hardest part wasn't Marcus, it was Sophia. She wasn't charged with the assault, but she was indicted as a co-conspirator in the fraud. Because I had refused to cooperate with her defense, and because I had handed over the journal, her lawyer, a public defender since I had cut off her funds, advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to one count of wire fraud and was sentenced to 3 years of probation and restitution. She didn't go to prison, but she lost everything else. The eviction from the Boston penthouse was finalized. Her car was repossessed. Her friends, the bridesmaids who had sneered at me, vanished the moment the credit card stopped working. I didn't see her during the proceedings. I waited in a private room to avoid the cameras. But on the day of her sentencing, I received a letter. It was delivered by her lawyer. A single sheet of paper, handwritten. Dad, it read, "I know you probably won't read this. I know you hate me, and you should. I got caught up in the life. Marcus made everything seem so easy, and I was so afraid of losing him that I was willing to lose you instead. I am working now. I got a job as a receptionist at a dental office in Revere. I live in a studio apartment. I take the bus. It's hard, but it's real. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm safe and that I miss you, not the bank account, just my dad, Sophia." I sat in my study, the new one in the house I had fortified, and read the letter over and over again. Part of me, the father part, wanted to drive to Revere to pick her up, to bring her home and fix it, to write a check and make the hardship go away. But then I looked at the scar on my hand from the fight with Marcus. I looked at the empty space on the wall where her photo used to be. And I realized that if I saved her now, I would be robbing her of the only lesson that could actually save her soul. She needed to learn how to survive without a safety net. She needed to build her own foundation. So I took the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in my desk drawer next to the journal. I didn't reply. I didn't send money. I let her live the life she had earned, hoping that one day, years from now, she would understand that my silence was the most loving thing I could give her. With the legal battles over, I turned my attention to the last piece of the puzzle. The company, Miller Concrete, was my life's work, but the events of the last year had shown me that hoarding wealth was a dangerous game. I didn't want to be the dragon Sophia had written about. I didn't want to die alone on a pile of gold that attracted only parasites. I called an all-hands meeting at the plant, the same place where I had fought Marcus. 300 men and women, drivers, pourers, dispatchers, accountants gathered in the warehouse. They looked nervous, expecting layoffs or a sale. I stood on a pallet of cement bags, holding a microphone, looking out at the faces of people who had actually been loyal to me, people who worked hard and went home to their families and didn't plot to put me in a nursing home. "Friends," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You all know what I've been through this year. You've seen the news. You've seen the police cars. It's been a hell of a ride." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I'm 69 years old now. I'm tired, and I have no heir to leave this company to." The room went silent. They knew about Sophia. But I continued. "I realized something. I do have a family. You are my family. You built this company with me. You drove the trucks in the snow. You stayed late to finish the pours. So as of today, I am transferring 100% of the ownership of Miller Concrete into an employee stock ownership plan." A gasp went through the room. "That means," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "that you own this place. The profits are yours. The equity is yours. I'm staying on as chairman of the board for $1 a year to help with the transition, but the company belongs to you." The silence stretched for a heartbeat, and then the room exploded. Men were cheering, throwing their hard hats in the air. Leo, my accountant, was smiling, actually smiling. I stepped down from the pallet and was swarmed by handshakes and hugs, real hugs from men with calloused hands and dirt under their fingernails, men who looked me in the eye with respect, not calculation. It was the proudest moment of my life. I walked out of the warehouse that day feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. I had given away my fortune, or at least the engine of it, and in return I had gained a legacy that Marcus could never understand. I kept enough to live comfortably. Of course, I'm not a martyr, and I kept the house on the hill, but my days of accumulating were over. Now, 6 months later, I am sitting on the deck of a small cabin I bought in Maine overlooking a rocky cove. It's quiet here. The air smells of salt and pine. I have a dog now, a rescue mutt named Buster, who sleeps at my feet and doesn't care about my aesthetic as long as I scratch his ears. I spend my days fishing, reading, and occasionally consulting on tricky pours for the guys back at the plant. I'm alone, yes. The holidays are quiet. I don't have grandkids running around. I don't have a daughter calling to check on me. There is a sadness there, a hollow ache that never fully goes away, but there is also peace, the peace of knowing that I am safe. The peace of knowing that the people in my life are there because they want to be, not because they are paid to be. Yesterday, I went into town to buy groceries. I saw a young couple arguing in the parking lot. The girl was crying and the boy was yelling at her about money, about how her father hadn't pitched in enough for something. I stopped and watched them for a moment. I wanted to go over and tell the boy to be careful, to tell the girl to run, but I didn't. It wasn't my story. I loaded my groceries into my truck, the same Ford F-150 that had carried me away from the wedding, and drove back to my cabin. I poured a glass of whiskey, good whiskey, not the dive bar rotgut, and sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about the wedding photos. The ones I was banned from. I realized I didn't need a photo to prove I existed. I looked at my hands resting on the railing, the missing fingertip, the scars, the age spots. These hands built a company. These hands fought off an attacker. These hands saved a daughter who didn't deserve it. These hands gave a future to 300 families. I took a sip of whiskey and smiled. Marcus was right. I didn't fit the aesthetic. I was something much more permanent. I was the concrete. And concrete, when it sets, is the hardest thing in the world to break.